24 mounted warriors don't just thunder across the open prairie by chance. They come with purpose. A reckoning, a call for justice, or blood spilled that cannot be forgotten. Dust clouds billowed behind their horses as the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of fire and sorrow. The ranchers' weathered hands tightened on the reins, heart pounding in a slow drumbeat of dread. But let's go back to where it all started. The morning air hung heavy with the scent of dry grass and pine smoke. The vast expanse of New Mexico territory stretched endlessly, rolling hills touched by early light, the jagged silhouette of the distant Sangre de Cristo Mountains standing silent watch. Ranch fences splintered under the weight of years, and the earth bore the scars of drought and storms, yet life stubbornly clung to the land. John Callahan was a man carved by this wilderness, his face etched with lines from wind and worry, his eyes the pale gray of a stormy sky. He moved slow, deliberate, each step measured, as if the land itself demanded respect. His ranch sat on the edge of town, far enough to feel the quiet and close enough to hear the murmurs of fear that rippled through the settlement. That morning, John found something he wasn't prepared for. Near the back of his barn, half hidden beneath the shadow of stacked hay, lay a small figure. A girl no older than 8 or 9, thin and trembling, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. Her dark eyes were wide and wild, reflecting a lifetime of pain too heavy for her years. Her skin bore the sun's burn and dirt of the desert, and a thin scar curved across her cheek like a forgotten riverbed. Her small hands clutched a worn leather pouch, the only thing she had left from a world far beyond John's own. He didn't know it yet, but this lost Apache child had crossed a dangerous line. In helping her, John would be risking everything: his reputation, his safety, and the fragile peace between his people and hers. He knelt beside her, voice low and steady, though his insides churned. "Hey there, little one. What's your name?" She didn't answer. Instead, she blinked slowly, then let out a soft, shuddering breath. John glanced around, half expecting someone, a sheriff, a neighbor, a rider from the nearby fort, to come charging up and demand he hand her over. But the morning held only silence. He looked back at the girl, her ragged breath uneven like the wind whispering through the barn's cracks. Something about her unsettled him, not just because she was a child, but because of the stories he'd heard, about Apache warriors, about lost children taken by soldiers, about blood spilled under desert skies. He knew what could happen if word got out that he was hiding her. Yet, the thought of leaving her there, alone and starving, was unbearable. The barn door creaked in the slight breeze, shadows shifting on the rough wooden floor. John's weather-beaten fingers gently brushed a lock of tangled black hair from her face. Her eyes flickered, wary but softening ever so slightly. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "I won't let anyone hurt you." The sky outside brightened, gold spilling over the horizon. The vast land seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for what would come next. John pulled a worn blanket from his saddlebag and wrapped it around the girl, whose tiny body trembled beneath the rough cloth. He could feel the weight of history pressing down. Decades of pain and misunderstanding between settlers and native tribes, promises broken and lives lost. But here, in this quiet barn, it was just a man and a scared child. He stood slowly, eyes flicking to the barn's weathered door, then back to the girl. The distant clang of the town's blacksmith hammering on iron drifted faintly on the breeze, a reminder that the world outside still turned, full of suspicion and rules. John's jaw tightened. He had no answers, only questions. Who was she running from? Why had she come here? And what would the cost be for helping a lost Apache child in a land where trust was as scarce as water? The sun climbed higher, burning away the shadows but leaving the air thick with tension. John's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the first flicker of movement caught his eye. Riders in the distance, their shapes hard against the sky. The moment was fragile, a balance between hope and danger. 24 mounted warriors don't just thunder across the open prairie by chance. They come for blood, for justice, or for war. John sat on the rough wooden porch of his homestead, the warm morning sun resting on his shoulders, but his mind churned with cold unease. The little girl, whom he'd taken inside and named Little Dawn without asking, was curled up by the hearth, eyes closed but restless. She hadn't spoken a word since he found her, and that silence gnawed at him more than any gunshot. Word had started to trickle through town. Folks were whispering. At first, it was just suspicion. John Callahan seen near the edge of his property with a shadow of a girl who wasn't from around here. But soon, the quiet murmurs became pointed questions. "Why'd you bring that Apache brat to your ranch, John?" called out old McGregor, leaning heavily on his cane at the general store. His eyes were sharp, the town's long-standing preacher watching like a hawk. "You're asking for trouble, boy. That kind don't mix with ours." John's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He'd learned long ago that speaking first in this town rarely ended well. At the saloon, whispers followed him like a shadow. Folks eyed him as if the desert sun had baked suspicion right into his skin. Some muttered about Apache raids, others about blood debts. A few, quieter ones, spoke of the girl's condition. Starvation, bruises. The way her eyes held a story that wasn't meant for settlers to hear. Sarah, the widow who ran the mercantile, approached him one evening as he refilled water buckets by the trough. "John," she said softly, "you need to think on what you're doing. Helping her might mean the law, or worse, the soldiers coming down on you. This town won't stand for it." John met her gaze, tired but unwavering. "She's just a child, Sarah. Doesn't matter whose blood runs through her veins." Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line. "It matters to them." That night, John sat beside the fire, watching Little Dawn's shallow breathing. Her frail hand twitched, and for the first time, she murmured something under her breath, a word that rolled off her tongue like a soft wind through the sagebrush. He caught only a fragment, Nantan. He didn't know what it meant, but it was a name heavy with meaning, something sacred and old. The following days were a slow battle between kindness and fear. John's neighbors watched from a distance, their distrust a tangible weight pressing against his back. The town's sheriff, a lean man named Grady, came by one afternoon, tipping his hat politely but with a cold edge in his eyes. "John, you're a good man, but you've got to understand this ain't just about you. Folks are nervous. The Apache don't take kindly to settlers crossing lines, and neither do we." John nodded. "I'm not planning to stir trouble, Grady, just giving a kid a chance." Grady's gaze flicked toward the barn. "We'll be watching. Don't make us regret it." As the days passed, the girl's strength began to return. She learned to trust John enough to eat and sleep without trembling. Still, the silence between them was filled with unspoken grief. She would sometimes stare out the window at the horizon, eyes distant and haunted. Then one evening, a rider arrived from the nearby fort, his horse splattered with dust and sweat. His news was grim. Apache scouts had been spotted near the territory's edge. Rumors swirled of a child missing from a nearby band, and talk of reprisals reached the town like wildfire. The sheriff called a meeting. Men gathered in the dusty square, voices low but fierce. Some wanted John to hand the girl over, others called for immediate action to protect the town. Fear had made them a brittle, angry crowd. John stood in the center, face calm but resolute. "She's not a weapon or a threat. She's just a child caught between worlds." Old McGregor spat on the ground. "You're playing with fire, Callahan. This ain't your fight." John's eyes flashed. "Maybe it's not, but I can't turn my back." That night, under a sky thick with stars, John returned to the barn and found Little Dawn awake. Her small hands clenched around the pouch she never let go. She looked up at him, eyes shining with a quiet plea. He knew then the choice wasn't his alone. The weight of what was coming pressed down harder, the town's suspicion, the soldiers' demands, and the silent watch of the distant desert. The fragile peace was breaking, and when dawn came it would bring more than just light. The wind had shifted by the time the first faint beats echoed across the valley. Soft, distant at first, like a pulse rising from the earth itself. John stood at the edge of his porch, his breath slow but steady, eyes fixed on the horizon where a thin column of dust marked a gathering force. The rumors were true. The Apache had come. The rising sun cast long shadows, turning the prairie into a stage set for a reckoning. 20 riders, then 40, emerged over the crest of a ridge, their horses steady, faces painted with solemn purpose. Among them, a woman rode with quiet authority, a leader whose presence demanded respect even before a word was spoken. John's hands tensed on the rail. The girl, little Dawn, sat close by, her small frame rigid with fear and something deeper, an understanding beyond her years. The townsfolk had kept their distance. Their windows shuttered, the hum of anxious whispers filling the air like the summer heat. Sheriff Grady approached John's house, eyes narrowing. "They're here. We've got to prepare." But John shook his head. "No guns drawn. Not yet." The riders slowed at the edge of the ranch, forming a circle that seemed to hold the land itself in balance. The leader dismounted with a grace that echoed the wind, and her gaze met John's, calm, unyielding. "I am Nahele," she said in measured English, voice low but clear. "We come for the girl." John swallowed the lump in his throat. "She's with me. She's safe." Nahele's eyes flickered with something sharp, pain, perhaps, or memory. "She is Nanton's child, lost to us, found by you. We seek her return." John's heart ached. He'd come to care for the girl like his own kin, but the truth of her origins was a thread he couldn't ignore. "If she is your daughter, then she belongs with her people." Nahele nodded slowly. "Yes, but the path has been long and hard. We must know she is unharmed." The silence that stretched between them was thick, the weight of generations pressing down in the early morning light. Behind John, the barn door creaked. Little Dawn stepped out, eyes wide, meeting the woman's gaze. For a moment, the world held its breath. Nahele knelt, reaching out her hand gently. "Child, do you know who you are?" The girl's lips trembled. Then she whispered a single word in her native tongue, a name carried on the wind for centuries. The riders dismounted, their movements slow, careful, as if stepping into a fragile truce. The town watched from afar, tension coiling tighter with every passing moment. Sheriff Grady's hand hovered near his holster, but John's voice cut through the rising unease. "Let's talk first. We can find peace without bloodshed." Nahele's eyes locked onto his. "Peace is fragile, but so is the child's life." The hours stretched like the endless plains. Words were few but heavy with meaning. Stories shared in broken phrases, gestures, and silent understanding. John saw the pain etched into Nahele's face, the weight of loss, the hope of reunion, and the fierce love that bridged worlds. As the sun climbed, casting its harsh light on the dusty ground, a quiet standoff held them all, settler and warrior, man and child, past and future. The choice was no longer just John's to make. It belonged to the girl who stood between two worlds, and the tribe that had come to claim her. And in that silence, the wind whispered a promise. Whatever came next, none would walk away unchanged. The late afternoon sun dipped low, painting the sky in bruised purples and gold, casting long shadows over the ranch. Inside the barn, the air was thick with a stillness that felt almost sacred, the kind of quiet that speaks louder than any words. Little Dawn sat cross-legged on the worn wooden floor, the flicker of candlelight catching the gentle curve of her face. Across from her, Nahele rested on a bundle of blankets, her eyes steady and warm, watching the child with a tenderness that made the walls seem less cold. John lingered near the doorway, his presence steady but careful, as if aware this was a moment he wasn't meant to intrude upon. The tension of the morning had softened, replaced by something fragile, the slow, trembling birth of trust. Nahele reached into her satchel and pulled out a small, hand-carved wooden flute. She lifted it with reverence, fingers dancing over the smooth surface before drawing a soft, haunting melody into the quiet. Little Dawn's eyes shone, a flicker of recognition crossing her features. She lifted a hand to her chest, touching the scar there, a silent acknowledgement of pain and belonging. Nahele's voice broke the silence then, low and sure. "Your heart remembers, even when your mind forgets." The child's gaze lifted to John, then back to Nahele, as if trying to piece together the fragments of a story too big for words. John stepped forward gently. She's been through hell, lost and afraid, but she's not broken. Nahele nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. No, she is strong, like the river that carves stone, slow but unstoppable. For a moment, the three of them sat in quiet communion. Man, woman, child, linked by wounds old as the land itself. Outside, the distant murmur of horses and voices reminded them of the world beyond this fragile refuge. The tribe's riders had camped nearby, their presence a constant reminder of the fragile line they all walked. Then little Dawn spoke. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of years of silence. I want to go home. The words were simple, but they shattered the air like glass. Nahele smiled gently, reaching for the child's hand. And we will take you there, little one. But first, you must know who you are. John swallowed the lump in his throat, the ache of impending loss settling deep in his chest. Yet, beneath it, a quiet pride bloomed. He had helped this child find her strength, even if it meant letting her go. Nahele looked at John then, her gaze steady and true. You have shown kindness where many would not. In doing so, you have honored us all. John nodded, words failing him. In that moment, he understood something deeper than fear or prejudice. A truth about humanity, about connection that crosses borders drawn in blood and soil. As the night deepened, they sat together. The girl who had once begged for shelter, the woman who claimed her as kin, and the rancher who dared to defy the world for a moment of grace. And in their silence, a fragile peace blossomed, fragile but real. The dawn would bring new challenges. But for now, there was only this. A breath held between past and future, pain and hope. The first light of dawn seeped slowly across the desert, turning the sky a pale wash of pink and silver. John stood outside his barn, the cool morning air carrying the scent of sage and distant cedar smoke. Around him, the riders of the Apache tribe gathered quietly, their horses restless but calm, faces softened by the dim light. Little Dawn sat astride a horse beside Nahele, her small hands gripping the reins with a mix of hesitation and newfound strength. She glanced back once, catching John's eye, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. A promise, a farewell, a thank you woven in the silence. The town had woken with whispers but no gunfire. Sheriff Grady had come by the night before, sober and quieter than John had ever seen him. Seems your way worked, Grady said, tipping his hat. Not many would have stood firm like you. John only nodded, his thoughts on the fragile thread of peace.